The Mangekyō Sharingan, the pinnacle of the Uchiha clan, at least without external means, houses some of the strongest abilities in the series, so I figured it would be fun to rank the Mangekyō Sharingan abilities weakest to strongest. To make this vid easy to digest, we're just going to be looking at these abilities in a vacuum and assuming whoever uses them is just able to use them pretty free from the limitations or maybe cooldown that some of these abilities have, making it so we can just strictly look at these abilities in terms of weakest to strongest. I also won't be talking about Izanagi or Izanami, as the Mangekyō Sharingan itself isn't required for the character to use these abilities, and we're not going to include the Susanoo and the variations that we see from it. This is strictly the unique eye abilities that we see throughout the series. Without further ado, we can just get straight into the combo. At the number 8 slot, we have Shin's right eye. It's almost fitting that at the bottom of the list, we have Shin, who is a self-proclaimed Uchiha, the former test subject of Orochimaru, who makes his debut and also just dies in the 7th Hokage in the Scarlet Spring. I'm going to be pretty straightforward. This Mangekyō ability is kind of butt, especially since we don't know that much on it, and in comparison to the rest of the abilities on this list, it really isn't that impressive. To break it down, Shin can essentially telekinetically manipulate tools after placing a special seal on them. We see this with him grabbing Sasuke's sword and controlling it so it stabs an off-guard Naruto. This also happens to be similar to the mini Shins that are able to manipulate segmented pieces of a shuriken against Naruto earlier on as well. The best use of this, in my opinion, is Shin's arm that is made up of some custom-made blades, as he's able to not only control them, but use them from a range as well. Him actually having the ability to also inhibit movement, or Sasuke's movements particularly, as he controls the blades to dig into Sasuke continuously. This whole ability is predicated on him controlling objects he already possesses or marking foreign objects to control them, as if he could control every metal object within its radius, there would be no need to manually mark Sasuke's own blade. It's basically just magnet release in a roundabout way, and compared to the other Mangekyō abilities on this list, just really isn't that impressive. It also seems like Shin's Mangekyō is connected to a smaller creature, likely some deformed Shin clone, that enables him to use space-time ninjutsu that's connected directly to his eye, but considering you need an entirely separate creature to make this work, it isn't really worth too much, at least in my eyes. So him being at the bottom of the list really shouldn't be too much of a surprise. The number 7 slot, we have Amaterasu, the highest level of fire release, jet black flames that appear at the focal point of the user's sight, the technique itself being regarded as the most powerful physical attack by characters like Black Zetsu. Characters like Sage Mode Kabuto do clarify later on that this is likely more so in reference to the Amaterasu being the greatest offensive ocular jutsu. I think what gives the Amaterasu this stock is the fact that they're noted to burn for 7 days and 7 nights, and are said to never extinguish until they've burned to ash whatever the caster's eye has sighted. Pretty much, even if you're strong enough to tank Amaterasu, you're just going to die to it at some point regardless. Instead of this ability just being the strongest of all time, this is my own middle ground interpretation, as Amaterasu being said to never extinguish until they burn to ash whatever the caster's eye has sighted is what directly follows the right eye being the most powerful attack by Black Zetsu himself. This technique is very strong, and there are good statements and feats surrounding it, such as Sasuke being able to light the entirety of the 8 tails up, with other characters in the series struggling with the Amaterasu flames themselves. However, this isn't exactly indicative to the Amaterasu technique itself. The problem with the technique, and just being blunt, it gets hoed by plot. There are many characters in the series that just have found workarounds to it that make it overall less formidable than other techniques on this list. Known workarounds are just outstatting the user to the extent the flames can't tag you due to you being faster than the user can visually track you, having a defense preset so the user can't place flames on you, this being closer to what's seen with Gaara in the 5 Kage Summit, although at that point Sasuke was controlling Amaterasu wisps and flinging them at Gaara rather than firing Amaterasu into his sand shield, which entails that the latter wouldn't have worked. This also being the case with Naruto shielding his arm with 9 Tails chakra, letting it droop off with the Amaterasu attached to it, or just shadow clone feint the Amaterasu itself, as we see with Momoshiki in that he can have the clone take the damage for you. These are more general counters to the Amaterasu. There are more hyper-specific ones, such as Nagato using Almighty Push or the Preta Path itself being used to absorb the Amaterasu, or specific substitution jutsu like the Orochimaru style substitution, which Sasuke was specifically saving for when Itachi busted out Amaterasu. I think the difference between Amaterasu and the MS abilities above it on this list don't get clipped nearly as hard even into the war arc, but also just don't have nearly as definitive counters due to them just being overall more threatening and difficult to deal with as opposed to Black Fire. It's generally very effective against the mid to higher end Kage of this series, but more often than not, as you go higher in the series, more characters have workarounds to it, which makes it less formidable than other Mangekyō abilities on this list that really don't have the same limitations or aren't countered nearly as much in the series itself. At the number 6 slot, we have Kagetsuchi. This is Sasuke's ocular ability located in his right eye. This is where Sasuke essentially just controls the Amaterasu flames. It's a ninjutsu where shape transformation is added to the immortal flames, that being the Amaterasu, to where Sasuke is able to form shapes or just control the flames for his benefit. The nature of this ability just makes it Amaterasu, but so much better. Changing the shape transformation of techniques does directly impact their properties, such as Chidori Senbon, which are noted to be specializing the Chidori itself to result in greater speed. However, with the Amaterasu and Kagetsuchi, the databook outright notes changing the flames into a sharp blade to greatly increase their killing power. So in terms of AP at least, Kagetsuchi levels the Amaterasu up, that also making sense if you consider it's just raw flames versus being transformed into a literal sword. Furthermore, Kagetsuchi makes it so there's nigh limitless application with the Amaterasu. The technique overall has near limitless versatility and can be used offensively and defensively, such as when Sasuke created a web of Amaterasu around his Susanoo by manipulating the flames to cover it. You also have points like Sasuke creating spikes out of these same flames, or the databook noting that he can use them as projectiles. When Sasuke obtains his eternal Mangekyō Sharingan, we actually see that this gets leveled up further, with him being able to create Enton arrows or Yasaka Magatama beads. It's pretty much better than Amaterasu in every way and has far more versatility, whether offensively or defensively. It's also worth mentioning, and this is kind of where I put that stipulation in the beginning, that Sasuke's control with Amaterasu does go up as his visual prowess goes up, so he goes from loosely manipulating the black flames in the 5 Kage summit to just, like I mentioned before, creating Yasaka Magatama beads or Enton arrow and swords. I mean, his Susanoo is literally just holding it and using it as a supplement weaponry. If you're taking the Kagetsuchi with Sasuke's eternal Mangekyō Sharingan, you can make a case it would actually be higher just due to how insane the versatility overall gets. However, basing it on just his Mangekyō Sharingan, I feel as if his placement here is pretty fair. At the number 5 slot, we have Tsukiyomi. This is the ultimate dojutsu made possible by the Mangekyō Sharingan. Originally, people on the face of the earth lived bound by limitations like time, gravity, space, or how people exert their abilities within those restrictions, which is what separates the victors from the vanquished. But in the mental world where the caster drags in the opponent, the Tsukiyomi just gives them control over those limitations. Inside this genjutsu, the physical world's common sense is completely irrelevant, and opposing the caster is impossible. As a result, the prisoner of this genjutsu can only wait until the collapse of their psyches. Even bodies made of less conventional constructs, such as iron or light itself, are just powerless before this genjutsu. This genjutsu is pretty much an instant GG. Even perfect Jinchuriki who have a partner to wake them up out of genjutsu are just going to be taken down due to the fact that Itachi controls time itself in this genjutsu, and he can pretty much flashbang you for 72 hours straight before your tailed beast partner has time to break you out. It's the speed at which the technique hits that makes it so formidable. Despite Tsukiyomi being a close range technique and Kagetsuchi being more versatile, if you make eye contact with the Mangekyō user in question with this genjutsu, it's an instant GG, which is actually a very easy condition to fulfill as a win con requirement in the series of Naruto. It's ridiculously hard to fight an opponent without looking directly at their eyes or their upper body as a whole, with characters such as Might Guy having to specialize an entire fighting style in order to just counter this with Kakashi. I think you would be able to say in terms of potency, it's directly on a similar tier to Amaterasu or Kagetsuchi, but due to how easy it is to get this ability off, it is much easier to work around. There is also the idea that in order to break this special Sharingan genjutsu, only somebody with a Kekkei Genkai and a Sharingan can actually resist it, which is actually what we see with Sasuke in the Itachi fight. Now, there's more circumstances at play there. I don't really want to get into that, but I do think the point stands that Kagetsuchi and Amaterasu do have workarounds as we've seen, whereas Tsukiyomi, if you get hit, is just a death sentence. at least compared to people of a relative tier compared to these abilities. Not saying Itachi's gonna look at Kaguya and hit her with the Tsukuyomi Nightmare Realm. I do think, however, you could make a case for Eternal Mangekyō Sharingan Sasuke's use of Kagetsuchi and that specific variation of it over Tsukuyomi, just due to how absurd the versatility is with it. However, in terms of Sasuke's Mangekyō Sharingan use of Kagetsuchi, I don't see it being quite as strong as Tsukuyomi as a whole. Kagetsuchi can be countered similarly to the Amaterasu, whereas Tsukuyomi, even later in the series with a higher grade of characters, doesn't really have that same level. This making a lot more sense when you consider that Tsukuyomi is shown to be on par with Eternal Mangekyō Sharingan Sasuke's Genjutsu, which does mean that Itachi's Mangekyō ability is him basically walking around with EMS Genjutsu, so it overall does have higher interpretations, and despite it not having quite as much range, I do think how effective it is later in the series. It makes a lot of sense that it would at the very least be this high, although again, if you wanted to say EMS Sasuke's use of Kagetsuchi was higher than this, I think that is also fair. Compared to other entries on this list, this specific ocular ability is less definable in my opinion. Like, everything above this is pretty set in stone, and everything below this is pretty set in stone, so this is really the only spot Tsukuyomi could go. I do think number 3 and number 4 are interchangeable depending on which you favor stylistically. However, both fill kind of similar conditions in the way they operate, that being Kakashi's right eye being the Kamui eye, and Shisui's use of Kodo Matsukami. It may be possible that Shisui has 2 versions of Kodo Matsukami. I think it's overall unclear due to the fact that Danzo had Hashirama's cells, which were lowering the cooldown of Shisui's eye, so overall it is a bit vague. Let's talk about Kodo Matsukami first, then Kamui, then explain why I believe both of these can be interchangeable or are just really comparable and do kind of belong in the same tier. Kodo Matsukami would be above the likes of Tsukuyomi, as not only does Data Book 4 just note that Shisui uses the strongest Genjutsu, which would include Tsukuyomi, but Itachi Uchiha himself shares a similar sentiment about Shisui regarding Kodo Matsukami as the ultimate Genjutsu. The difference between Kodo Matsukami and other Genjutsu is it essentially manipulates the target's actions without the target in question being aware of it. You're achieving victory without a battle. Kodo Matsukami being similar to Tsukuyomi in statements is pretty direct, however it is very superior in its functionality as well. On top of Kodo Matsukami being able to be used without eye contact, which is a big requirement for Tsukuyomi itself, Kodo Matsukami is also stated in Data Book 4 to be usable from all ranges. This includes close, medium, and long range, compared to Tsukuyomi, which is noted in Data Book 2 to only be usable in close range. So on top of just being a better Genjutsu overall and bypassing the eye contact limitation, it also is just capable of being used from a much farther distance. This becomes even more evident when you consider statements such as Data Book 2, which remarks Tsukuyomi is feared as the strongest Genjutsu, whereas Kodo Matsukami is just stated the strongest Genjutsu pretty outright. This being evidenced as it was going to be used on Eternal Mangekyō Sharingan Sasuke, so even by a feats metric, there is just much higher stock for Kodo Matsukami as a whole. The other Mangekyō Sharingan ability that I believe could be interchangeable with Kodo Matsukami is Kakashi's left eye, that being the Kamui eye. Starting off, Kamui and Kodo Matsukami can be used from all ranges, that being close, medium, and long distance. And for anybody who's wondering how I'm deducing this, on top of this just being outright stated to us in other databook entries, for Databook 3, it's less explicit, but it actually is found in the top right with these little symbols, which dictate different attributes that Jutsu have. The attributes the Jutsu has are filled out, and in this case, despite the fact that there's no English translation, we actually can just translate what these mean, and if you want something for reference, I'll just put up Kaguya's Amino Naminaka for reference, which also showcases the exact same points, close, middle, and long distance, which are also filled out with the Kamui databook. Just for anybody who wanted 100% clarification on where I was pulling these values from, as they are pretty integral to the discussion as a whole, which do give them far greater stock than the likes of Tsukuyomi or other Mangekyō techniques, which, while having versatility, don't work in every sense more often than not. Madarasu itself is noted to be a close range technique, and Blaze Release Kagetsuchi is noted to be a close to mid-range technique. So even by range standards, Kagetsuchi obviously stands above Amaterasu since it extends that range, but not to the extent to where it impacts the placement, at least in my opinion, compared to Kodo Matsukami and Kamui, which work everywhere. Like, there's no situation where they won't be good. Furthermore, Kamui, like Kodo Matsukami, doesn't actually require eye contact in order to initiate. You can just Kamui snipe your opponent wherever they are, with the added bonus of being able to pull yourself into another time space or teleport objects into another time space and allow them to re-emerge as well. Kakashi's Kamui makes possible the transference of any object to another world. This technique can only be used after taking time to create as much chakra as he can. Kakashi captures his target in the sealed dimension and concentrates his mind on a point beyond his line of sight. The line of sight point is actually very important because beyond his line of sight means you can make a case. It can spawn past barriers since Kakashi's just creating a pseudo portal into another time space and teleporting the part that he's focusing on into that time space. This being even more plausible when you consider Kakashi was seemingly, or the way it's presented, actively hopping under logs while he was focusing the Kamui on Deidara, which means the space might have actually formed while a log was over his head. But this is a bit more nebulous and kind of does change depending on which manga panel you use, so I won't say it's 100%. Shout out Sage of Thick Caps though. We also know the size of Kamui can be tweaked as well depending on your mastery of it. Kakashi showcases varying feats with it as he gets better, with the ability ranging from comboing Deidara's arm, to comboing away clone explosions, to comboing away 2 Susanoo arrows in the 5 Kage Summit, to planning on comboing away 5 Bijou bombs being aimed right at him, to comboing the head of the Geto Mazo off. Kakashi attempted this, but this was foiled. The absolute highest end for this being that Kakashi was planning to wipe out the 10 Tails itself. However, this feat more so comes from him being amped off the Kurama cloak, which has been shown to amplify ninjutsu or ninjutsu potency for other characters, so it would likely be the same for Kamui as well. Pretty much just the best genjutsu versus spawning rifts that could decapitate your opponent or send them to another time space, both working from all ranges. Pretty much you can see why these two are interchangeable, but I do feel like they are the closest to MS abilities on this list, and more so change depending on what you value in a fight. At the number 2 slot, we have Sarada's Mangekyō ability, Ohirume. This ability enables Sarada to create up to 4 black spheres that can range in size from about 5 to about 250 centimeters. Sarada can control the strength of the gravitational force at will, as well as make the spheres detonate like bombs. Sarada can pick and choose what the gravitational force affects, but can only target things in her field of vision. However, if she targets a living being, then the gravitational force is also applied to Sarada. As a result, she can maneuver the 4 spheres to balance the gravitational pull applied onto her, allowing her to levitate. If she moves with the spheres, she's also able to just mimic Otsutsuki flight itself. The ability essentially operates as a mobile Kamui. Not only is Sarada able to just create 4 breaches that operate similar to the Kamui Rift itself, but also works defensively, as when Ryu attacks Sarada with his Iron Sand, she just creates another sphere to absorb the Iron Sand itself. The upper limit of this ability is that Sarada can create 4 of these spheres like we mentioned, and can actually stun lock her opponent into the air using the gravitational force itself. Sarada even being able to pick what or who is affected by it, as Konohamaru and Ko were unaffected compared to Ryu, who was. It's basically a similar effect to Kamui in what Sarada is able to do, although I'd argue it's superior in a lot of ways, as even if she were to misfire, the range of the spears can just increase to where the radius itself is so far that the ninjutsu shot at her just gets absorbed in, and so does the target inevitably. This all coupled with Otsutsuki flight that can be used in tandem with the spheres, it's pretty clear cut why she's actually at the number 2 slot. As far as this ability's range, we don't have any definitive statements. It does say in the Boruto database that it's based on Sarada's field of vision. However, Amaterasu is also based on this to some extent, and it is regarded as close range, so it may be that it is a close range technique. However, I would make the case that it likely performs on all ranges due to the sheer sense of distance that is showcased with Sarada using the jutsu against Ryu, although its exact range is just not stated anywhere, so you could just say it's more vague as a whole. But if you were able to say all distances for Sarada's ability, that being close, middle, and long, I think that's entirely fair. At the number 1 slot, we have Obito's right eye, that being his Kamui eye. This is one of the most broken abilities in Naruto, period. Even including Boruto abilities, this ability is still up there. The Kamui ability is a powerful dojutsu that transfers everything into a dimension created with the Mangekyō Sharingan. The right eye, even unconsciously, makes a body part slip through by transferring it into the other dimension. What this means is that Obito, if he was going to take damage, makes that specific body part transfer over into the other time space, even unconsciously. This is being showcased many times throughout the series. However, it's very important to note that Obito materializing is the conscious part. So in order to defeat Obito and his Kamui eye, you essentially have to trick him into materializing. I believe the unconscious part is actually his default state. I believe this is represented when he actually awakens his Mangekyō Sharingan for the first time and actually has to focus in order to not phase through and to grab Rin. This ability also being stated in Fanbook 2 to allow Obito to phase through all ninjutsu and physical attacks, which is displayed with objects actually being attached to Obito still phasing through him, such as Conan's paper bombs or Shino's bugs. I mean, this ability was just so broken that the only way Obito could actually be defeated was through Kakashi having his other eye, and the other characters in question having continuous intel on him garnered through their various experiences against Obito, whether during the war arc or earlier on in the show. This ability being so profound that it actually enables Obito to just fight people stronger than him due to the passive nature of Kamui, seen with him being able to phase through Ten Tails Madara's physical attacks, despite Madara being vastly stronger and outstanding that version of Obito by far. This isn't a limitless ability, obviously, the only drawback being that you can only phase for 5 minutes straight, but being honest, not a single person in the show of Naruto, save for Conan with extensive prep, was actually able to capitalize on this in the heat of battle, so I don't even think it's worth mentioning. There's also just completely ignoring the fact that you can house weapons in the Kamui space and fling them at your opponent. It's also very worth noting that this right eye enables you, if you grab somebody, to just send them to another time space, meaning if you can actually trick them, like Obito versus Minato before Minato just teleported away, you can actually just GG by sending them into another time space and letting them starve. You cannot defeat this Mangekyō Sharingan ability. You have to defeat the user and capitalize on their mistakes. Pretty clear cut why it's at the #1 slot. That's the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you did and want to see more Naruto content. Apologies for my voice in this video. I know I sound a little crazy. Got a couple voice cracks here and there. Dropped the aura a little bit. It is what it is. I'm gonna catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.